Two professors were forced off of their college campus simply for being white. In this clip, Bishop Barron sits down with Dr. Heather Hang and Dr. Brett Weinstein as they reflect on the incident that led to their dismissal at Evergreen College. But this conversation goes deeper. It asks the question of what is driving the rise of such irrational behavior in our culture today. Check this out.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with Brett Weinstein and with Heather Hang, two people that came on the cultural radar screen maybe about 5 years ago with the Evergreen State College situation, but have emerged, I think, in the last 5 years as really trenchant commentators on all sorts of aspects of the culture. So delighted you're here with us today. We'll talk about your book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, and I think lots of other issues, maybe where religion and science find some interface. But I thought we'd start with Evergreen State, and I don't want to force you for the thousandth time to tell this story. I thought maybe I could do a quick little summary for our viewers, and then I want to ask you just one pointed question about it. So my understanding is at the college, where both of you were professors, there was a tradition where people of color would voluntarily withdraw for a day from the campus, sort of highlight the important contribution they make to the mainstream culture. But then tables were turned in 2017 when white members of the community were basically instructed, were told, you have to leave the campus for a day. You saw that as a frankly racist move, and given your Jewish background, something especially chilling to be told, where you can and can't go. When you objected to the authorities along those lines, all hell broke loose, I think it's fair to say. I've seen on YouTube, some of the extraordinary films of the students, responding to you. And to me, it was like we're not in America anymore. It's like we're in Ba'athist Iraq, or we're in Pol Pot's Cambodia or something. And I urge people, watch those videos sometime. But here's first of all, is that basically okay, that telling of the story? What am I missing?
One thing I will correct.
Go ahead.
We were not told we could not come to campus, but we were coerced into not coming to campus. There was no question the administration did not want white people on campus for that day, and they made that very clear. They have now made it murky in the aftermath of this emerging into public.
But here's the question I want to ask both of you. I've been a critic of wokeism in different contexts. What's the one thing, the most important thing you learned about wokeism from that whole experience?
I would say one has to begin to ask the question what it means for somebody to believe something. And the more iterations of this we see, the more I realize that we don't mean the same thing when we say we have a belief. And so when looking at a mob that appears to be compelled of something that is obviously nonsense, one has to ask the question, well, how did they arrive there? And you can't really have a conversation with those people. You will talk past each other if your purpose is to compel them that what they believe isn't true by your metric. So we have to recognize we're having two different conversations, and that's part of the reason that we make no progress.
Talking past each other. Heather, what's the one lesson you got about wokeism?
Boy, I'm not sure I have a one. I mean, I think what Brett said is absolutely apt. I came to question, maybe this is exactly the same thing that Brett was just saying, but I came to question every conversation that I was having about what the words that I was interchanging with people seemed to mean, and what it suggested about worldview. And we had, as you said, we had both been professors for 15 years and loved it, and loved our students. And our students never turned on us, never came for us. In fact, they defended us to the end. But one of the things that you learn as an educator who really comes to know your students, who really cares about your students, is what can you what kinds of tools can you use to get into their brains and their pasts such that whatever it is that you're trying to encourage them to learn how to do can really land, and they can then own it, as opposed to, I just have to remember what Heather was saying. Right? No. That's not what education is. So when the vast majority, it would appear, of a college suddenly turned on two professors who had been living what we thought were wonderful lives there for 15 years. What did it say about all of those conversations and relationships and friendships in some cases about what was actually underlying those relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's not unique to the woke ideology, that we end up betraying ourselves by saying things that aren't actually true. But I do think it allows people to be more confused about their true selves.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because the question of truth, what bugs me the most is this complete relativizing of even the notion of truth. So that even in your field, so perhaps in the social sciences or in philosophy, where there's a kind of a greater flexibility, you might say, but in math and the hard sciences, it's still maintained. Well, that's truth because you're part of the patriarchy, or you're saying that's true because you're part of the oppressive class. That when we give up on the idea of truth, we're giving up on something that brings us together, right? If we abandon truth as a value in itself, God help us. And then the second thing for me is the end of public conversation. We can't have a public conversation where truth is the criterion that we all accept and that we respect each other enough to have that conversation. Something so fundamental is broken down in our society.
Yeah.
You're in exactly the right place. This is the meta conversation that haunts everything over which we cannot reach agreement. And in fact, Heather and I began discussing the conflict over COVID policy, and at some point we realized that we were dealing with the exact same thing that we had seen over questions of patriarchy and white supremacy at Evergreen. And we started referring to it as a question of medical wokeness. And what was really taking place was we were being told that we had misunderstood something, when what we were really being told was this is not the place for us to have an open conversation. And, I don't agree that is a place that can exist, right? In a cosmopolitan society where we don't all share the same belief structure, we have to figure out how to navigate controversial issues, and we have to do it with a shared agreement that our purpose has to be to remain, as one people, to govern ourselves well, and to do the best we can in an emerging complex scenario. But we've lost that. Somehow we're not all on the same team with respect to governing ourselves.
And it's dangerous. One of the master images in your book is the campfire, which I love. A lot of good things happen around campfires, you argue, but one of them is conversation, the sharing of ideas. And I've always been struck by, I'm classically trained, so going back to Plato and Aristotle, those people, that the philosophical tradition begins in many ways with dialogue. So the Platonic dialogues, it's a conversation out of which truth emerges. My hero, St. Thomas Aquinas, the Middle Ages didn't have a lecture hall so much. They had disputed questions where an issue would be raised and then all the different points of view would be exchanged. You see that in Thomas's writing. The conversational model. I don't like the move Descartes makes, the cogito, I think, the sort of withdrawal into privacy and then coming up with philosophy out of that experience. I'm a cogitamus sort of person. I mean, we think. And I love that about the campfire, right? That from primeval times we gather around campfires. But if we lose the capacity to talk to each other in a civil way, we lose the campfire, something essential is lost.
Very much so. And this is one of the moves, if you will, that we make in the book with regard to how we define consciousness.
Yeah.
And it is not inherently a standard definition of consciousness, but we find definition of consciousness in the exchange of ideas.
Right.
That which rises to consciousness is that which can be packaged for the exchange.
Yeah.
And that reveals, I think, how social we are, right? We are an inherently social organism, and all of us have private lives, of course.
Right.
But so I think maybe it's these two things that we have so far talked about. It is, there is some underlying truth. There is an objective reality, and religion, science, art, all of these things and more are seeking an understanding of that.
Yeah.
And we may never arrive at it, and we may not agree on what it is, but we are all seeking it. And the woke move, the postmodern move, is at some level to reject maybe that it even exists.
Right.
And that's kind of, that's a non-starter for
Because we
conversation.
splinter then, and conversation ends at that point.
Yeah, it ends. And that's a non-starter for then the shared experience that is at its most fundamental what humans are, is the shared experience, for instance, around the campfire.
So if I can try to put what you've said about the retreat into the personal thinking into our framework. There's an ebb and flow between an interactive collective consciousness and a necessarily private version. And I would argue that it's something, we have undeclared dark ages in which the exchange of ideas are not welcome. And so really, I actually have a term for it. I call the people who think independently when thinking collectively isn't allowed, keepers of the flame. And so I think some compassion for their position has to be extended, because what happens when it is again possible for us to talk together is that those who remember how to do it because they've brought it into a less obvious space, those people jumpstart the process. And unfortunately, we are now at this moment facing a bizarre kind of dark age where in some ways we have never had better tools for interacting with each other, and it has never been less welcome that we do so. And so looking for the mechanism now to re-jumpstart that conversation, which has to start with this question that you raised, which is, do we not agree on the conversation as paramount?
This conversation was a fascinating reflection on the need for objective truth seekers to engage in genuine dialogue, not to achieve uniformity, but to foster unity around a shared pursuit of understanding. What stood out was the way they exposed how wokeness silences dissent and traps individuals within an irrational mob mentality. Dr. Weinstein's insight was especially sobering to me. Despite having unprecedented tools for dialogue, such as social media and digital platforms, as two examples, we're worse at honest discourse than ever before. But this raises a deeper question, not just what is happening, but why is it happening? At its core, the conversation gestures towards a profound truth. Human beings are, yes, sinners. We resist the truth because it exposes us. We construct lies, ideological, cultural, even personal, to avoid facing this reality, which leads to a spiritual diagnosis. The human heart is sinful. The human heart is disordered. The human heart is restless. While in this clip, they suggest better dialogue is the solution, and rightly so, that's at least part of it, I would take it even further. We are not merely social creatures who need one another. We are relational beings made for communion with our Heavenly Father. Until our hearts are reoriented toward Him, until we believe in God and His Son and the Spirit that He has sent, we will remain divided, restless, and hostile towards one another. Our unity must be grounded not just in shared conversation, but in shared conversion. And until we get to the bottom of that, y'all, there will be no solutions. Woke ideologies, for all their apparent moral energy, often reveal a deeper restlessness. They attempt to find meaning through controlling others and their influence and outrages. But without self mastery, without truth, they collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. The problem isn't merely irrationality, it's unbelief. And so the path forward isn't simply more conversation, and I want to make that clear, but about a regeneration and new orientation toward the one who is truth himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life, says Jesus. Only when we return to God can our restless hearts finally find peace. And only then can our conversations not become merely aimed at the real, but that which is redemptive. And that is where the rubber meets the crossroad. That is what all humans long for. Not mere realism or truth, but redemption. And we find that special revelation, that ultimate truth in Jesus Christ, in the gospel of salvation, the good news that we are not saved by what we do, but by what Christ has done for us on the cross of Calvary. That is so real, and the resurrection is so real tethered to that, that it is the only thing that truly can make us new humans, created in the image of God. Till we get there, we never will be where we need to be. All right, that's all I have for this clip. Remember that Christianity is Christ, and without him, there is no Christianity. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.